The moment we launched this game, I honestly thought it was just going to be another creepy little indie horror. You know the type: bad graphics, awkward sound effects, a couple of cheap jump scares you can predict a mile away. I was even joking around before we clicked start, saying, "All right, guys, let's see how fast this one makes me scream." But the second the title screen faded in, everything felt off. I can't explain it. It wasn't just the usual eerie background music or a glitchy filter. No, this felt heavy. Like something invisible was pressing against the room, sitting in the corners watching us. And then the name popped up across the screen, the giant Puppeteer. At first I laughed. I mean, really, a puppeteer? That sounded more goofy than scary. But then I remembered this wasn't just some random name. This was based on a legend, a story people in an old town whispered about. Parents used to tell their kids that if they stayed out too late at night, the puppeteer would come. He'd tug on invisible strings and lead them away, making them dance until they couldn't move anymore. Creepy bedtime story, sure, but still just a story, right? Except the way the game presented it didn't feel like a story. It felt like an invitation. The opening screen wasn't colorful. No glowing press start button. Just a single spotlight in the middle of a dark stage, swaying slightly, as if someone had nudged it. And if you listened closely, not the normal way, but really leaned in with your headphones, you could hear it. The faintest sound, a dragging noise, something being pulled across the floor. I froze. My heart was already speeding up, and I hadn't even pressed a button yet. I looked over at my friend and said, "Tell me you hear that too," and he nodded without saying a word. That's when it hit me. This wasn't going to be a funny, throwaway horror game. This was different. This was the kind of game that gets under your skin before you even start playing. And trust me, you'll want to see what happens when we finally meet him, because the nightmare, it didn't stay inside the game. The screen faded to black, and when it cleared, we were standing in the middle of a town. At first glance, it didn't look destroyed or ruined like you'd expect from a horror game. No blood on the walls, no broken cars, no bodies lying around. It looked defrozen. The streets were empty. The air was completely still. Not even a single NPC wandering around. It was like someone had pressed pause on life itself. Houses stood perfectly in line, their windows wide open, curtains gently swaying like someone had just left them. And that's what made it so much worse, because if something's messy, you think, okay, something bad happened here. But when everything looks untouched, clean, and quiet, that's when your brain starts screaming at you. Where is everyone? The silence wasn't total, though. That's the part that messed with me. Every now and then, you'd hear a faint creak, a door slowly opening by itself, or the metallic squeak of a swing set moving back and forth in the wind. But the problem was there was no wind. The trees were still. The grass didn't move. Only those objects, the doors, the swings, the shutters, like something unseen was nudging them on purpose. I was already uneasy, but then I noticed something strange on the ground. At first, I thought it was just cracks in the street, but when I moved closer, the light from the flickering lamp above caught it. Strings, thin, silvery strings stretched across the road, tangled around lamp posts and fences, dangling from rooftops like spider webs. They glinted faintly every time the light flickered. I froze, leaned closer to the screen, and whispered, "Are those strings?" My friend squinted too, then leaned back in his chair like, "Nope, nope, I don't like this." The camera shifted slightly, and that's when I realized these weren't random details in the background. They weren't just set design, they were connected. Every single one of those strings stretched outward into the foggy distance, as if they were leading somewhere or back to someone. My stomach sank. I had this overwhelming feeling that we weren't just in the town. We were inside a puppet show. Every house, every light, every single object, it wasn't random. It was being controlled. We stood there for a second, completely still, controllers in hand, debating if we should keep going. But curiosity always wins, right? I mean, we didn't come here to not find out what was at the other end of those strings. So we followed them, slowly, carefully, step by step down that empty road, with nothing but the flicker of the lamps above, and the faint sound of our own footsteps echoing through the silence. And then it happened, from somewhere deep in the fog, a sound, tap. We froze, another one, tap, tap. It wasn't footsteps. It was sharper, like wood knocking against stone, slow, deliberate, getting closer. I looked at my friend and whispered, "Please tell me that's part of the ambience." He shook his head. His eyes were wide, his knuckles white around the controller. The sound kept coming, tap, tap, tap. And then the strings in front of us trembled, not from the wind, not from us moving. They were pulled. Something was on the other end. It started soft, almost like the sound was testing us. Tappy, tap, that sharp knock of wood against stone. At first, I thought maybe it was coming from the environment, like an old shutter slamming loose somewhere in the fog. But then it grew louder, closer, too steady to be random, too deliberate to be background noise. I held my breath without even realizing it. My thumb hovered over the joystick, but I couldn't move. Neither of us could. We just stared at the screen, frozen, waiting for whatever was making that sound to finally show itself. And then, out of the fog, a shape emerged. At first, I thought it was a tree swaying because it was so tall and jagged. But no, it was moving, slowly, step by step. The shadow pulled itself into view, and the moment the light hit it, my entire body locked up. The giant puppeteer, he wasn't a cutscene, he wasn't a background detail, he was there. Towering over the rooftops, his body stretched too long, too thin, as if someone had carved a human shape out of wood and then forced it to keep growing. His limbs dangled loosely, but not uselessly. Each hand gripped a bundle of strings that scraped and snapped across the cobblestones as he walked. They dragged behind him like veins spilling out of a body, and his head his head tilted unnaturally to the side, like it was permanently straining to look at something just out of view. And yet, I swear in that moment his eyes locked on me, not my character on the screen, me. I laughed nervously, trying to shake it off. Okay, cool design, very creepy. Good job, game devs. But deep down, I wasn't laughing. My hands had gone ice cold. My heartbeat was thumping so hard I could hear it in my ears. It didn't feel like I was playing a game anymore. It felt like I had just been noticed. And then he moved. Not toward us, not in a jump scare, but with one slow, deliberate motion, he tugged the strings. The buildings around us groaned. Doors slammed shut, shutters clapped against windows, lampposts bent slightly under the pull. It was like the whole town itself was connected to him. Like everything was his puppet. The sound was unbearable wood cracking, nails straining, bricks scraping against each other. My friend whispered, "He's not just in the background, he's controlling the map." That realization hit me like a punch to the chest. This wasn't a boss we were going to fight. This wasn't an enemy you could shoot or run from. He was literally holding the environment in his hands. I gripped the controller tighter, my palms sweating. Okay, we just move forward, just keep going. But as we took a step, his head twitched again. Just a little, almost like he was following us. The silence between taps stretched long, too long, until tap. Another step, louder this time. The fog swirled, the strings tightened, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if he pulled just a little harder, he could crush the entire town in his fist. And that's when it hit me. He didn't want the town, he wanted us. The moment I realized he wanted us, the entire screen shifted. No warning, no transition, just this gut-wrenching snap like the game had ripped itself apart. The streets we had just walked down twisted violently, folding inward like paper crumpling in a fist. I gripped the controller so hard my hands hurt. Run, run, run. I yelled, even though it wasn't like my friend didn't already know. We bolted down the only path that hadn't been swallowed by the collapsing town, and that's when I understood how the puppeteer played. He didn't chase you like a monster. He built the chase. Every step we took, he was pulling strings, bending the map, closing off exits. It wasn't us running away from him, it was him guiding us. Like rats in a maze he'd already drawn, the ground shook as wooden beams snapped overhead. Lampposts bent at impossible angles, blocking alleys, forcing us into tighter and tighter streets. Every door we tried was slammed shut, yanked closed by those same silvery strings. Windows shattered inward, glass spraying the floor, but none of them led anywhere. It was like the whole town was alive, and it hated us. Behind us, his strings dragged across the cobblestone with this awful snapping sound, like whips cracking. You'd hear them snag, pull tight, and then snap as something broke in the distance, and every time they did, the map changed again. I was half laughing, half screaming at this point, "Nope, nope, nope, we're done. This is actually unfair." But even while I joked, my chest felt like it was being squeezed. The game was closing in. We turned a corner, desperate for escape, and that's when we saw it, a figure, standing perfectly still in the middle of the street. It wasn't him. It was a puppet, not tiny, not cute. Human-sized, its wooden frame gleamed under the flickering light. Its head was tilted unnaturally far, mouth sewn shut with thick black thread. Its eyes, if you could call them eyes, were just hollow black sockets, and yet it felt like it was staring right through us. We stopped dead in our tracks. For a second, I thought maybe it was a statue, something placed there just to freak us out. But then it moved, slowly, jerky, almost like it was resisting its own body. The arms twitched, the head snapped slightly, and then, so painfully slow, it lifted one arm and pointed. Not forward, not behind, straight at us. I swear my blood went cold. Behind us, I heard the dragging strings get louder, closer, scraping against stone-like nails on a chalkboard. I whispered, "He's here. Oh my God, he's right behind us." But the puppet didn't move to attack. It didn't run. It just stood there, pointing, and in that moment I realized this wasn't an enemy, this was a warning. A marker. The puppeteer was showing us exactly where he wanted us to go. And the worst part, the street behind us was already gone. Buildings folded in on themselves like paper, cutting off every way out. We had no choice, so we stepped forward, following the puppet's gaze. And that's when the real game began. The puppet's finger didn't waver. It didn't shake. It just kept pointing, its hollow eyes locked on us, as if daring us to move. Every instinct I had screamed, "Don't follow, turn around, find another way." But there wasn't another way. Behind us, the buildings had collapsed into black nothingness, streets folding like torn pages ripped from a book. So we moved step by step past the puppet, down the narrow road it was showing us, and the entire time I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't choosing this path. We weren't surviving, we were performing, and then we saw it, the theater. It rose out of the fog like it had been waiting for us the whole time. Massive, old but untouched. The paint on its walls hadn't peeled, the golden trim still gleamed faintly under the moonlight, and the giant red curtains at the entrance seemed freshly polished. The rest of the town looked like it had been abandoned for centuries, but this place was alive. I actually laughed nervously when I saw it. Of course it's a theater. Of course the giant creepy puppeteer has his own theater. But I wasn't really joking. My chest was tight, my palms were sweating, and deep down I knew exactly what this meant. We stepped inside. Instantly the air changed, heavy, dusty. The smell of old wood and velvet filled the speakers so vividly I almost swore I could smell it in my room. The doors shut behind us with a hollow slam, strings tightening across them like locks. We were trapped. Rows and rows of red velvet seats stretched out before us, disappearing into the shadows. The only light came from a single spotlight shining down on the stage. The wooden boards gleamed faintly, like they'd been polished just for us. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a town we were exploring. This wasn't an open world horror. The entire time, from the moment we started, we were being led here. Every street, every turn, every puppet. It had all been part of his script. I whispered, "This isn't his world, it's his stage." And then they appeared. At first, I thought the seats were empty, but one by one, figures emerged from the darkness. Puppets. Dozens of them. Their button eyes glinting faintly under the dim light. Wooden heads snapping in unnatural, jerky motions as they all turned, in perfect sync, to look directly at us. My stomach dropped. I wanted to pause the game, to take my hands off the controller, but I couldn't. I was frozen. The silence was unbearable. No music, no creaking, just hundreds of eyes watching, waiting. And then from above, something shifted, a faint creak, a whisper of tension in the air, the strings. They dropped from the ceiling slowly, swaying as if invisible hands were lowering them into place. Thin, silvery threads, dozens of them, dangling over the stage. At first, they hovered harmlessly above, but then one of them lowered just a little too far, brushed against my character's arm. And it stuck. The thread clung like it was alive, tightening instantly, wrapping around my character's wrist. I yanked the joystick, trying to break free, but the screen glitched, the controls locked. My friend shouted, "It's pulling you up. It's pulling you up." And that's when I realized what was happening. We weren't the audience. We were the next performance. The moment that string wrapped around my arm, everything inside me screamed to shut the game off, but I couldn't. The controls were frozen, the screen flickered with static, and all I could do was watch as the thread tightened, digging deeper into my character's wrist. The camera tilted up slowly, painfully, as more strings descended from the ceiling. One by one, they latched onto me, arms, legs, torso, until my entire body was tangled, suspended like a broken marionette. The puppets in the seats leaned forward, their wooden jaws creaking, heads snapping at strange angles, eyes glowing faintly. They weren't just watching anymore, they were waiting, and then the stage shook. The spotlight shifted, dimmed, and finally revealed him. The giant puppeteer stepped into the light. Up close, he was worse than I imagined. His wooden frame groaned with every movement, splinters snapping off and falling like dust. His head was cocked so far to the side I swore it should have broken off. Strings stretched from his hands, his shoulders, even his mouth, each one pulsing faintly like veins carrying something alive. He reached up slowly, one massive hand wrapping around the bundle of strings holding me up. And then he pulled. I could feel it, not in the game, in me. My chest tightened like someone had wrapped their hand around my ribs and started squeezing. My friend shouted, "Pause it, quit out, get out." But the pause menu wouldn't open. Every button we pressed just made the strings tighter. The theater roared with silence, no music, no sound effects, just the creak of strings and the sharp crack of wood under pressure. My character's legs kicked helplessly, dangling in the air, and my heart was racing so hard I thought it might burst. And then it happened. The lights in my room flickered. For half a second, everything went black. Monitor, lamp, even the little LED strip on my desk. I nearly dropped the controller, and when the lights snapped back on, the game was still running. The puppeteer was still there. Only now his head wasn't tilted toward my character anymore. It was tilted toward me. I lost it. Ripped the headphones off, yanked the plug out of the wall, sat there in dead silence, just staring at the blank screen. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the controller. My friend wouldn't even look at me. He just kept repeating, "Nope, nope, nope." We sat there for what felt like forever, neither of us saying a word, just listening to the silence of the room, waiting for something else to happen. It didn't, at least not yet. I don't know if it was a coincidence, some weird glitch in the power, or if the puppeteer really reached through that screen for us. But one thing's for sure, I am never opening that game at night again. Unless, of course, you guys dare me to.